You okay? Yeah, thank you so much for having me here, and especially to Sarah for putting this together. As Penny said, my name is Brenda Lee, and I started the Boulder Bear Coalition. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and why I started it and what we've done up in Boulder. I know it's a very different community and the size of the town and the number of animals we have coming through, but I hope that some of the principles we've used in Boulder that have been effective in reducing human-bear conflict is something that that your community could benefit from. So to begin with, if you see the picture here, these are two cubs. It's hard to see, they both have green tags in their ears. And I'll be talking a little bit later about what those green tags indicate. When I moved to Boulder 13 years ago, I was really surprised to find out that there were bears cruising down my alleyway. And I live about 3 blocks from the foothills in a very urban area. And I was quite shocked by this. And there was a mama bear that shortly after I moved to Boulder who had to be euthanized. And her cub, they weren't able to get the cub. And CPW officers were out looking for her, and the cub. And so I actually started putting signs up, looking for the cub. I do a lot of running and hiking in the foothills, and trying to see where this cub was. And the more people I met in town, what they told me was, whatever you do not call CPW. And I heard this over and over again. And what people were saying was they're the bear killers, and if you let them know that you find that cub, they will kill that cub. So I took it upon myself to learn on my own. Well, is this true or not? And so I became a CPW bear sitter, which is a really unique and wonderful program. And my goal was, number one, was to help protect the bears, understand why they were being killed in town, and understand this attitude of the community, because it felt to me very much like a victim sort of space of they're the bad guys, we're the good guys, and we don't want to talk to them. And I tend to go through life of, I'm not a victim, and I can make a change. And I really believe that in this case, that maybe there was something not being looked at. So I started to learn about bears. So next slide. So I'll start out with just kind of some of the things I learned about black bears. So I learned that they hibernate. When they hibernate, the mama will pick out a couple different dens to choose from. That way, if there's a flood or some kind of natural thing happening, they know where the other den is that they've already figured out. They'll often come back to the same den as well. Next slide. The mama bear will, if she's impregnated, she will have 2 to 3 cubs or 1 to 3 cubs. What I've seen for the most part is 2 cubs in Boulder. And it's very important to recognize that the mama bear will be impregnated, and when she goes into hibernation, depending on the health of her body, will depend on how many of those embryos actually implant. So if she's not of a good healthy weight, say because there was a freeze, there's not enough food source for her, she may wake up with no cubs. And if she goes to bed very healthy, she may wake up with 3. And the reason that's important is because I hear over the years many people asking, why don't we supplement in a bad crop year? Why don't we put food in the foothills for them? And it's an interesting question. It's like, let's put a honey pot out there for them. But the problem with that is just this. Then we may have a lot of bears going to sleep very healthy and waking up with many cubs, and then it just perpetuates the problem. Okay, next slide. So there's mama with her 2 cubs. The 2 cubs usually, or her cubs will usually stay with her through 1 or 2 seasons. So they'll hibernate, they'll be born in the early or mid-winter, come out with her in the spring, and then hibernate with her that following winter, and sometimes the following. And then they'll disperse. Male bears often, we find in Boulder, it's the bears that are coming through town are quite often a juvenile male on its own for the first time looking for territory. So like in Boulder, while the bears live in the mountains, it is natural for them to go look for territory. And so there's no way to say, okay, just keep the bears up in the mountains. It's really, they are gonna once in a while come through. Okay, next slide. So what I've learned in my education the last 12 years about black bears is they're really shy. And I've spent quite a bit of time with bears. And they really are shy. They get scared and they may do a false charge because they're scared and they're trying to say, stay away, I'm nervous. But they're typically very shy. So the question really became, well, why are there bears in town? So the next slide. Because they're hungry. And just as Penny talked about mountain lions, it's all about food. Food and reproduction. And really the question before that for me was, why are CPW officers in town? That became my first question. And the question was, the answer was, because they are in town to protect human safety from wildlife. In Boulder, it's mostly mountain lions and black bears, sometimes a rabbit, coyote. But they're there to help keep people safe. And so then it became, well, then why are the bears here? Well, they're hungry. So next slide. And an urban bear is basically a hungry bear. Next one. And they're opportunists. So they are driven by the need to eat for 20 hours a day, 20,000 calories a day when they're leading up to hibernation. So the only thing on their mind is eating. And in an urban area, when you have food available for them, it's basically putting food out on a golden platter and saying, come and get it. So next slide. So easy calories, this was so I spent lots of time walking the alleys in Boulder, documenting all the trash. My kids are now teenagers, but when they were little, it's like, if you want to know where mom is, she's in the alleys with the trash. And I got to know the trash haulers at 6 in the morning, talking to them, where had they seen bears. So this is just one of hundreds of photos of trash, documenting trash in the alleys. So next one, more, next one. And the biggest problem was in the college area. And this is the thing I learned from the trash haulers. Bears know the trash schedule. So they would know on Thursday mornings a certain area, and that's where they'd go. They're smart. They're really smart. And when it comes to food, they're going to figure out where that food is. So the next one, advice from a bear, do not leave food unlocked in the car, because bears are very good at getting into cars. They're not very good at getting out. And they will destroy the car. So that's just simple piece of advice. If you live somewhere where there's bears, do not keep food in the car. Okay, next one. So why is it a problem that they're in town? I mean, I think a lot of this is very obvious, but it was a question that I had to answer as I continued my education about this. And so it's a problem because, number one, you have trash you have to clean up. And car damaged livestock. We do have some livestock in Boulder, and every year there's more and more bears feeding our livestock. They're typically omnivores, but they are opportunists. So if there is a goat or chickens, they will definitely take advantage of that if they're hungry. So the risk to the bear being in town: cars, unhealthy food. We had a bear a couple years ago that died from eating. She had antifreeze in her stomach. Sometimes they get plastic for some reason. They like diapers, and that is really, really bad for their intestinal tract. So there's two things I really want to talk about that has to do with bear management across Colorado. And every state has their own rules. So in Colorado, if a bear is touched once, for whatever reason, it might have been, it was just in the wrong part of town at the wrong time, and the officers feel like it's the best thing to take this bear and move it somewhere else, give it a chance to get out of town. They will tag that bear with two on both their ears. So in Boulder, it's green. Every city jurisdiction has their own colors or county. So that way we know if a bear comes through town, they can recognize that where it came from. They're also numbered. So there's kind of this term called the two-strike policy, which is, I don't think officers tend to like that term, but it just, it is something that most people talk about, use that terminology. So if an officer touches a bear once, for whatever reason, if they have to handle that bear a second time, that bear has to be euthanized. So if a bear is touched that second time, even if the first time it got caught eating pears in a tree in the middle of town, and the next time they're caught eating apples in another part of town, that bear will be euthanized. So that's pretty tragic. And a lot of people would say, most of those who don't call it CPW, also had said, let's get rid of that law. And what I learned over time was, even if we got rid of that policy, it's still gonna hold true. That if that bear comes back to town, its days are numbered. The mortality rate for bears that have to be relocated is very high. So in my opinion, a bear that is tagged once is a dead bear very soon. And then that brings us to relocation. So the complication with relocating a bear is, one, if the bear has cubs, they want to be able to tranquilize the bear where it's not going to hurt itself falling out of a tree, and that they don't lose the cubs going different directions. So that's a very tricky thing for officers to figure out, especially in a town like Boulder where you've got roads and lots of people. The thing about relocation is the officers in their jurisdiction have to ask officers in another jurisdiction if they're willing to take their bear. And this is already considered a nuisance bear. And nuisance is a subjective term, but basically it's a bear that's in town that they don't want in town. And so they have to get permission to take their nuisance bear and put it in some other, say, evergreen, who they're like, we have our own nuisance bears. So that's number one, not an easy task. When a bear is located, I don't know what the percentage is, the officers here might know, they come back. And especially if it's a mama with cubs. Often mamas with cubs that are in town, they find safety in town. And other bears, that they find food in town. Food, water, beautiful trees to sleep in. So they come back. In fact, there was one bear maybe 10 years ago that was moved up to the Wyoming-Colorado border. He was a huge bear, 550-pound bear, who had been captured in South Boulder, moved up. He had jaw injury. They stopped at CU Fort Collins campus, the veterinary campus. They did surgery on his jaw, so he's out of it. Drive him all the way up to the border. Within 3 weeks, he was back in the same area where he was found. So, you know, there's more going on inside those heads than you know, that we just have to consider. So relocation typically does not work. So my line of thinking has been, let's avoid that bear ever being touched in the first place. All right, so next slide. Probably can't really see that. CPW keeps track of all the bears that have been killed by roadkill, have been killed by officers. In Boulder, I've been incredibly impressed by the CPW officers and in their transparency. And I really think that's partly because I wasn't coming at it as a you versus me. It was, hey, tell me how you're managing bears and what can I do to help? So this has been really helpful, and I have all the way up until 2018. Okay, next one. So do we have a bear problem? Do we have a people problem? I think you can probably guess what my opinion is. I think we have a people problem. So next one. Bears like honey. Next one. Here's some beehives that had electric fence but wasn't turned on. Bears are really sensitive to electricity. If they get zapped once, they don't come back. And it could be, one of the officers had told me they had a electric mat in front of their garage because a bear had gotten into their chicken feed. When that bear got zapped once, it wouldn't go anywhere near the house. And they can smell it, apparently, or sense it. So if you turn it off, they'll be back. But if you have that going, they won't come around. So that's something that Boulder, we're really looking at, increasing the use of electric fencing. Okay, next one, or electric mats as well. Bears love fruit. That was an interesting realization is a lot of Boulder has 100-year-old apple trees. It used to be, lots of Boulder was an apple orchard, pears, apples, all kinds of beautiful fruit. So they come down for the fruit. Okay, next one. So this was a map of bear sightings between 2009 and 2015. Now some of those might be the same bear. So it's not differentiating between bears. But what we found was, what we started to do is I started working with the city to map out where are bears seen in Boulder, where's the majority of the problem. And as you can see, the lower part to the left is college area. So students are rotating out every year, so even if you educate them, the next year you have a new set of students. And thinking about bears is not their first priority. In fact, there were students who would call Christian, the CPW officer, and say, can you please take care of this bear? Every time I come home from a party, I see this bear. So, yeah, priorities. All right, so next slide. So keep in mind that map. And then this map is fruit. Where are all the fruit trees in town? So this was just starting to get a map. And if you looked at those two and put them on top of each other, they pretty much match up. So next slide. So cottonwood trees, that's another. So I was just thinking about what are all the reasons they're here. So trees, big beautiful trees I can sleep in, and which a lot of those trees were planted 100 years ago. And so I pulled up maps from over 100 years ago, and it was mostly just plains, Boulder-wise. You didn't have all these trees. So with all the creeks and the farmers' ditches and the trees, those basically, if you look at an aerial map, where all the lines of trees are is where there's water, and that's where the bears are moving through town. They're taking those corridors. Okay, next one. And again, this is an area we had a lot of bear issues, and the city didn't understand why they were there, and you could just see these beautiful corridors through neighborhoods. Okay, next one. Okay, so my approach was, let's be proactive. Like, let's not wait for crisis and have to call an officer to come into town and deal with a crisis. So let's figure out how we can reduce attractants and increase deterrence. Okay, next one. So trash was really the number one, and that's the number one across the US for bears coming into urban areas. It's trash. And so the most effective way is keep trash inside or in a bear-resistant trash cart. So what I found at City Council in Boulder is the line of thinking was that the bear-resistant trash carts were big and heavy. And they're not. They're the 32-gallon, 64, 96. I have a bunch of them in my backyard because I bought a whole bunch so that I could sell them to people because they're really hard to find. But then our local hardware store started carrying them, and the local trash company as well. And so we really worked on getting more and more of these cans out there, and part of it was just educating people, because when people found out they were available, they're about $200 a can, so they're not cheap. But people are like, oh my God, that's great. I don't want to be cleaning up trash, and I certainly don't want a bear killed because I am not keeping my trash secure. For some people, it can be hard getting your hand in there. We've had issues with elderly areas where people can't put their finger in. So the city and the trash company has been actually really amazing in working with those communities to figure out solutions to that. And they have been able to figure it out because there's lots of different designs. Okay, and that one, it says Barracuda. Great company. It's a family-owned company. I think it's in Connecticut. And it really became, what can the city do to make sure the community is being responsible and minimizing bears coming into town so that they don't have to rely on the CPW officers. And so the city really had to take on this idea of having an ordinance in town to require a certain part of town to use trash cans. Now, I'm not about like the more rules the better or anything like that, but what we were finding, especially in that Uni Hill area, the college area, was that education just wasn't enough. And it could be in a community as your own, small enough that that could be enough. And then you have positive peer pressure. But in a city as large and as rotating of population, it was really tough to do that. We tried. So there, 2014, they started Boulder Bear, not Boulder Bear, the Bear Protection Ordinance, where we have over 12,000 homes, businesses that have to use bear-resistant trash carts or the big bins. Okay, next one. So what we found was no law is good without good enforcement. So I was at city council again, to the city's chagrin, because I was like, okay, it's great, we got this law passed, but I just spent 20 hours this week writing up hundreds of notifications on trash being strewn because the police were not enforcing the law. So they're on it, they're awesome. They're just, but that, it takes a team, absolutely. So they've been great, they didn't realize how bad it was. And so money talks, it's a fine of $250, $500, $1,000, and then a court date. And the landlord will get fined. Okay, so next one. So this is one great thing, a tool that the city had already in place but wasn't being used. It's an app on the phone. You just can take a picture of trash strewn and hit submit, immediately goes to the police department, they get a record, I get a record back on what happened. So again, it's kind of that transparency, but it wasn't really so much oversight, it was more of how can I help you know where the trash cans are and where you need to send officers. So that's been really great. So next one. So apples, next one. So Boulder Bear Coalition, along with 4 other nonprofits, came together to create a new, they're in the process right now creating a new nonprofit, or creating an NGO, Community Fruit Rescue. So we help the community pick fruit. We distribute it to homeless shelter, BBSD, a school district for applesauce, and all the grade C apples, we divide them into grade A, B, and C. Grade C apples, we have a group taking them up to the Wild Animal Sanctuary in Keensburg to those bears. So next one. And this is how many, so the first year we did it was 6,700 pounds and 14,000 and 19,000. And as you notice, it's like every 2 years. So it seems as if there's a pattern of every 2 years we have a big crop year. And then in the years in between we don't. Okay, so next one, we also do canning workshops and how to use that fruit. And it's all free. We send out volunteers. We have teams of volunteers throughout the season to pick those fruit. Bear sitting, that is a program through CPW and also through Open Space and Mountain Parks in Boulder. They have their own set of bear sitters. And what we do is go out when there's a bear in town, and it's close enough to open space that we know they'll go back on their own, but it's also close to neighborhoods, a school, a busy road. So we want to make sure they're not going in the direction we don't want them to go. So we'll sit under the tree and we will ring bells and yell at them to keep them up in the tree. Now these guys were not having any of it, the cubs. So they ran down the tree, ran across the street, and luckily we had 3 bear sitters, so one kept an eye on the mama, and the 2 of us kept an eye on the cubs. But it every time we'll have people there all day. We have shifts every 2 hours. The sun goes down, those bears are gone. And you've been watching this 400-pound bear all day and it just disappears. And they go back to open space. So it's a really great program. We don't want to make the bears comfortable with people, but at the same time, so it's that mixed bag. But make them mad when they're trying to come down. Okay, next one. One of the other things we did was come up with a native food buffer zone. So this idea of the honey pot, instead of bringing like the fruit that we just gleaned up to them, how about we plant trees that are native to them? And open space, mountain parks love the idea. So they actually provided 200 rootstock of chokecherry and some other things that bears really like. And so Boulder Bear Coalition got a team of volunteers. We went up and we planted them. This is Odile. And we had 2 areas. We're doing 2 more. We have camera traps so we can see what animals are coming through. And today, David Niels, who was supposed to be here to also speak, I guess he was going to speak at the last one that got canceled because of the snow. He actually is doing the same thing up in Loveland. So I was just so excited. So I've had a lot of interest throughout the United States, people finding this very intriguing. So yeah, so that's been great. Next one. Electric fencing, that's something we're currently really working on, is how to educate people about licensing for electric fencing, who has livestock. There's no information really. So we're working on getting that information and how we can up the use of that. Next one. Oh, the text didn't come out, but really what it came down to was a partnership, collaboration of Boulder Bear Coalition, which really our role is defining our roles together. So our role was the community voice and really the voice for the bears, like trying to understand from a bear's perspective why they're there. And what can we do as a community to keep them from coming into town? City of Boulder's responsibility is to set and enforce laws. And so they write policy, they stay on top of things, make sure the police is doing their job. In Colorado Parks and Wildlife, I have to say, when I became a bear sitter, I just was amazed at how good their program is, and that they really are intent. They don't want to kill bears. And they certainly don't want the outcry of the community. So, so it became just a really nice partnership where we may not agree ethically on some things, but that's aside. We came up with a common goal between these 3 departments, and now every other month we have a meeting. There's about 12 of us now, from 12, and representing maybe 5 departments, where we talk about what are our common goal, and our common goal is keeping bears out of town. And as lovely as they are to see, it's not good for them or us, so it's just better to keep them out. So once we are able to come to that common goal, it's made it a lot easier to set priorities and decide who's doing what. Bears love hammocks. It's really funny, especially the cubs. They'll go in circles around it. So the future right now is no bears in town, which is really not a realistic goal, but let's at least make it as low as possible. And those that wander through town, don't make it comfortable so they stay. Increase hazing, that's also something we're working on. Again, that's difficult in a bigger city. That's probably something here that the officers could use sandbags in a shotgun. It hurts, but it doesn't kill them. It's much better than the alternative. So if you see them doing that, I'd say give them a handshake. Say thank you for doing that, because it will keep the bears out. Electric fencing, and then just wider outreach. And what I have found is, like being here today, is fabulous, because it means that other communities are thinking along the same way. It's like, there's a problem, what do we do? And I hope that I've shown that there's a lot communities can do. So next one, and that's it. And feel free to contact me, and hopefully during the Q&A I can answer any questions.